There are stories etched into the ice of the Great North, legends whispered on winds that have howled through these valleys for 1,000 years. They speak of fortunes won and lost, of lives given for the promise of a yellow gleam in a frozen creek bed. This is the story of the Klondike Gold Rush, a maelstrom of hope and despair that drew over 100,000 souls into the heart of a merciless wilderness. But not all that glitters is gold, and not all ground is meant to be broken. Our story is not about the lucky few who struck it rich. It's about a darkness that lies beneath the permafrost, a warning that was ignored, and a greed so profound it deafened men to the whispers of the land itself. It is the story of 3 men who were told not to dig on sacred ground. They laughed until the ice cracked. The year is 1897. The world is alight with a fever, a contagious madness for gold. It has a name: Klondike. From the docks of Seattle to the farmlands of the Midwest, men abandoned their lives, hypnotized by headlines that screamed of mountains made of gold and creeks paved with nuggets the size of a man's fist. They poured into the Yukon, a tide of humanity flooding a land that was never meant to hold so many. Their final destination was Dawson City, a chaotic, frozen boomtown that had erupted from the mud and ice almost overnight. It was a city built on whiskey, ambition, and desperation. Saloons spilled light and raucous noise onto streets thick with mud in the summer and frozen solid in the winter. Fortunes were made in a single day at the claims office and lost in a single night at the gambling tables. Into this whirlwind of frantic energy walked 3 men. They were cut from the same cloth as thousands of others, yet they believed themselves to be different, sharper, more deserving. Their leader was Jack Thornton, tall and broad-shouldered with a confidence that bordered on arrogance. Jack saw the world as a series of obstacles to be conquered. He had been a foreman in a Pennsylvania coal mine and believed the grit and grime of that life had forged him into a man harder than any northern winter. For him, the Klondike wasn't an adventure, it was an inevitability. His destiny was to be rich, and this was the place where he would claim it. Flanking him were the brothers, Finn and Marcus O'Connell. Marcus, the elder, was the muscle, a quiet, brooding man who rarely spoke. He communicated with his fists and his axe. He trusted Jack's judgment implicitly, his loyalty as solid and unthinking as a block of granite. Finn was the younger, the thinker, the map reader. His eyes held a spark of caution that Jack's and Marcus's lacked. He had been a clerk in Boston, and while he dreamed of gold, a part of him was terrified by the savage beauty and immense scale of the wilderness they had entered. For weeks, they worked the overcrowded creeks around Dawson, finding only dust and disillusionment. Every promising claim was already staked, every shovelful of dirt a testament to their tardiness. The fever that had driven them north began to curdle into frustration. Jack's confidence began to fray at the edges, replaced by a grim, dangerous impatience. It was during one of these bleak evenings, huddled in a smoky saloon, that they first heard the whispers. A grizzled old prospector, his face a road map of frostbite and failure, spoke in a low voice of a place called Shadow Creek. It was a valley, he said, just a few days' trek north, a place the stampeders had somehow missed. But there was a reason it was untouched. The local Trondekwichyn people, the native inhabitants of this land, refused to go near it. They called it Fet the Zere Man, the Weeping Valley. They said it was a place where the spirits of their ancestors rested,
and the ground itself held a sorrow that would swallow any who dared to disturb it. Jack scoffed, his voice loud enough to turn heads. "Spirits? Sorrow? It sounds to me like a story cooked up by natives to keep a rich claim for themselves." The old prospector just shook his head, looking down into his glass. "Some things are older than gold, son. But the seed was planted, a valley untouched, a place no one else dared to go. To Jack, it wasn't a warning. It was an invitation, a challenge. The very next morning, he dragged Finn and Marcus to the trading post to buy the last of their supplies. As they were loading their sled, a figure emerged from the morning mist. He was an old man, a Trondikwichin elder. His face was a tapestry of deep lines, each one a story of a long life lived in harmony with this harsh land. His eyes, dark and piercing, seemed to look right through Jack's bravado. He introduced himself as Kalen. He had heard the talk. He knew where they were going. "The place you seek is not for you," Kalen said, his voice quiet but firm, carrying no hint of pleading, only a statement of fact. "It is a sacred place, a place of burial. The gold you find there is not a treasure. It is the anchor that holds our ancestors' spirits to the land. To take it is to unleash a great emptiness." Jack smirked, hoisting a heavy sack onto the sled. "Thanks for the advice, old man, but we're not afraid of ghost stories." "This is not a story," Kalen replied, his gaze unwavering. He pointed a finger towards the north, towards the unseen valley. "That ground is not dead. It sleeps. It remembers. If you strike it with your picks and your shovels, it will awaken, and it will not be merciful." Marcus shifted his weight, his hand resting on the handle of his axe. Finn looked from the elder to Jack, a knot of unease tightening in his stomach. But Jack simply laughed, a harsh, barking sound that felt alien in the crisp morning air. "We'll take our chances," he said, turning his back on the old man. "Let the spirits keep their sorrow. We'll take the gold." As they mushed their dogs and pulled away from Dawson, Finn glanced back. Kalen hadn't moved. He stood like a statue of weathered stone, watching them go, his expression not of anger, but of profound pity. The warning had been given. The line had been crossed.
The journey to Shadow Creek was brutal. The temperature plummeted, and a relentless wind clawed at them, stealing the warmth from their bones and the resolve from their hearts. It was as if the land itself was trying to turn them back. The dogs whined, the sled runners groaned, and even the indomitable Marcus began to show signs of weariness. Only Jack seemed energized by the struggle, his jaw set, his eyes fixed on the northern horizon, as if he could will the gold into existence through sheer force of will. Finn, meanwhile, felt a growing dread with every step. The elder's words echoed in his mind. "It will awaken." He started noticing things. The unnatural silence of the forests they passed through, devoid of even the call of a raven. The strange anthropomorphic shapes the snow-laden trees seemed to take in the twilight. Once he swore he saw a figure watching them from a distant ridge, only for it to vanish when he blinked. He tried to tell Jack, but was quickly silenced. "You're letting that old man's nonsense get to you, Finn," Jack snapped, his breath pluming in the frigid air. "It's just the cold playing tricks on your mind. Focus on the gold. Think of what it will buy you." After 4 days of relentless travel, they found it. A narrow opening between two towering granite cliffs led into a valley unlike any they had ever seen. It was shrouded in a perpetual twilight, the high cliffs blocking out much of the direct sun. A frozen creek, black as obsidian, snaked through its center. The silence here was different. It wasn't empty. It felt heavy, watchful. They made camp, and with a feverish urgency, Jack and Marcus began to attack the bank of the frozen creek. The ground was frozen solid, as hard as iron. For hours, the only sounds were the rhythmic thud of the picks against the earth and the labored breathing of the men. Finn, tasked with panning the dirt they chipped away, felt his hope dwindling. There was nothing. Then it happened. A glint in his pan. He swirled the icy water again, his heart hammering against his ribs. It wasn't just a glint, it was a flake. A thick, heavy flake of pure gold. He shouted, his voice cracking. Jack and Marcus scrambled over, their eyes wide. In the next pan, there were 3 more flakes, and in the one after that, a small, smooth nugget that rested in Finn's palm like a solidified drop of sunlight. The discovery broke the valley's spell. Laughter, raw and triumphant, echoed off the cliffs. Jack threw his head back and roared at the gray sky, a primal scream of victory. They had done it. They had found the untouched claim, the jackpot. The days that followed were a blur of back-breaking labor and delirious excitement. The ground was richer than their wildest dreams. Every pan yielded gold. They found nuggets wedged between rocks and thick seams of gold dust in the frozen gravel. They built a rocker, a crude but effective machine, and worked from the first hint of dawn until the encroaching darkness forced them to stop. They filled canvas pouch after canvas pouch, their hoard growing into a tangible, heavy weight that promised a new life. But as their wealth grew, so did a strange and unsettling atmosphere. The initial euphoria began to be tainted by something else, something unnerving. The whispers started first. Faint at first. Finn thought it was just the wind whistling through the cliffs, but it grew more distinct, sounding almost like voices, just at the edge of hearing. He would spin around, pickaxe in hand, but there was never anyone there. Jack and Marcus claimed they heard nothing, telling him he was losing his nerve. Then their tools began to move. A shovel left by the creek bed would be found 20 feet away, half buried in a snowdrift. A pickaxe would vanish from camp, only to reappear the next morning leaning against a tree on the other side of the clearing. Jack blamed it on carelessness, on minds addled by exhaustion, but his denials grew less convincing each time. The nights were the worst. Sleep offered no escape. All 3 men were plagued with vivid, disturbing nightmares. Finn dreamt of being underwater, trapped beneath a sheet of black ice, silent figures with empty eyes watching him from the riverbed below. Marcus, the stoic ox of a man, would whimper in his sleep, dreaming of the ground crumbling beneath him, pulling him down into an endless, crushing darkness. Even Jack, who refused to speak of his dreams, would wake up in a cold sweat, his face pale, the arrogance momentarily stripped away by some unseen terror. One afternoon, while digging deeper into the creek bank, Marcus's shovel struck something that wasn't rock. It was wood. Brushing away the frozen earth, they uncovered the end of a crudely carved wooden plank. They dug around it, their curiosity overriding their fear. It was a grave marker, old, weathered, and covered in symbols they didn't recognize. They had been digging in a cemetery. Finn dropped his shovel, stumbling back in horror. "Jack, we have to stop," he pleaded, his voice trembling. "Coelin was right. This is sacred ground. This is a burial site." For a moment, Jack stared at the exposed marker, his expression unreadable. A flicker of something, perhaps even fear, crossed his face, but then he looked at the growing pile of gold pouches by their tent. His features hardened, his eyes turning to flint. "We've come too far to be scared off by a pile of old bones," he snarled, hefting his pickaxe. He swung it high and brought it down with ferocious force, shattering the ancient grave marker into splinters. "The dead don't need gold, we do." A sudden, powerful gust of wind ripped through the valley, extinguishing their campfire and plunging them into an abrupt, chilling twilight. The temperature seemed to drop 10 degrees in a second, and in the profound silence that followed, a new sound emerged. A low, groaning, cracking sound. It was coming from the frozen creek. The act of desecration changed everything. The valley's passive, watchful menace was replaced by an active, palpable hostility. The strange occurrences were no longer subtle. Boulders would dislodge from the cliffs above, crashing down near their camp with no apparent cause. Their food supplies began to spoil at an unnatural rate. The dogs, once boisterous, were now perpetually huddled together, whining with a low, constant terror. The men themselves began to unravel. The shared dream of wealth that had united them was now the very thing tearing them apart. Marcus became paranoid and withdrawn, often seen muttering to himself, his eyes darting towards the shadows. He started hoarding his share of the gold, sleeping with the pouches clutched to his chest. Finn was a wreck of frayed nerves, starting at every sound, his pleas to leave becoming more desperate. But Jack, however, only grew more obsessed. The valley's resistance seemed to fuel his stubbornness. He saw it as a final test of his will. He pushed them harder, forcing them to work longer hours, ignoring the cracking ice, the falling rocks, and the growing fear in his companions' eyes. He was a man possessed, no longer digging for a fortune, but waging a war against the land itself. Their work had led them to the center of the creek, where the ice was thickest. Jack was convinced the mother lode, the source of all the flakes and nuggets, lay directly beneath them, in a deep pool now frozen solid. For 2 days they chipped and sawed at the black ice, a Herculean task that left their muscles screaming and their hands raw. As they worked, a storm began to gather. It was unlike any weather they had ever seen. The sky didn't just cloud over, it turned a bruised, sickly purple gray. The wind ceased its howling and dropped to an eerie, dead calm. An immense pressure built in the air, a feeling of something immense and terrible holding its breath. Finn threw down his saw. "Jack, look at the sky. This isn't natural. We have to get out of here, now!" "We're not leaving!" Jack roared, his voice nearly manic. "Not when we're this close. The storm will pass. The gold is forever." And then they broke through. Marcus's pickaxe pierced the final layer of ice, and the tool was met not with a solid crunch of the gravel bed, but with a hollow space. Peering into the hole, they saw it. In the murky depths, illuminated by their lantern, was a sight that defied belief. A massive vein of gold, as thick as a man's arm, was wedged between 2 enormous boulders on the creek bed. It wasn't just a deposit. It was a river of solid gold. For a heartbeat, all fear was forgotten, replaced by a raw, primal avarice. They had found it, the heart of the Klondike. More gold than they could carry, more than they could spend in a dozen lifetimes. Jack let out a wild, unhinged laugh. As he celebrated, he failed to notice that the cracking sound from the ice had returned, louder now, more insistent. It was no longer just the creek. The entire valley seemed to be groaning around them, a deep, resonant sound that vibrated up through the soles of their boots. It was at that moment the storm broke. It didn't start with a few snowflakes. It was an instantaneous, blinding wall of white. A blizzard of impossible ferocity erupted, a hurricane of wind and ice that reduced visibility to zero. The temperature plunged so rapidly they could feel their skin tightening, the moisture in their eyes threatening to freeze. Pandemonium ensued. Marcus, in a blind panic, tried to scramble back towards the bank, but he was disoriented in the whiteout. Finn screamed Jack's name, but his voice was swallowed by the roar of the storm. And then came the sound that would haunt Finn for the rest of his days. It was not the crack of ice breaking under weight. It was the explosive, deafening sound of the earth itself shattering. The black ice of Shadow Creek didn't just break, it detonated. With a force that defied nature, the entire frozen surface of the creek erupted upwards. It wasn't a simple cave-in, it was an upheaval, a geyser of supercooled, pressurized water, and massive shards of ice exploded from beneath their feet, a trap sprung by the desecrated land. The last thing Finn saw was Jack, standing directly over the motherlode, his face a mask of utter shock, his triumphant laugh still frozen on his lips. The ground beneath him simply vanished, replaced by a churning vortex of black water, ice, and rock. He was swallowed whole in an instant. Marcus, closer to the bank, let out a terrified cry as a fissure wide enough to swallow a house opened up between him and the perceived safety of the shore. The very ground he stood on tilted, and he slid, scrabbling for purchase, into the raging, newly born torrent. Finn was thrown backwards by the initial blast, landing hard on the creek bank, the impact knocking the wind from him. He lay there, gasping, as the world dissolved into a chaos of roaring water, grinding ice, and the shrieking wind of the unnatural storm. The weeping valley was finally living up to its name, and its tears were a torrent of icy death. The storm raged for what felt like an eternity. Finn huddled behind a rock outcropping, numb with cold and terror, a helpless witness to the valley's apocalyptic fury. The sounds of the cataclysm eventually subsided, replaced once more by the howl of the wind, which now sounded like a mournful dirge. When the blizzard finally broke, and a weak gray light filtered back into the valley, the scene was unrecognizable. The creek was gone. In its place was a deep, jagged canyon steaming in the frigid air, littered with shattered blocks of ice. The water had receded, vanishing back into the depths from which it had come. There was no sign of Jack or Marcus, no sign of their sled, their tent, or the small mountain of gold they had accumulated. Everything was gone, erased, swallowed by the awakened earth. Except for one small object resting on the edge of the new canyon, glinting in the pale light. It was a single, smooth nugget of gold, no bigger than Finn's thumb. A final, mocking reminder of the prize they had sought. Finn stared at it, and for the first time he didn't see a promise of wealth. He saw the face of the elder, Kalen. He saw Jack's arrogant laugh. He saw the splintered grave marker. He saw death. He turned, and without a backward glance, began to walk. It took him 6 days to stumble back to the outskirts of Dawson City. He was a ghost. His face was ravaged by frostbite, his eyes were hollow, and his body was emaciated. He didn't have a single flake of gold on him, but he carried a weight far heavier. The miners and trappers who found him thought he was just another failed prospector, another soul broken by the Klondike. He tried to tell his story, but the words came out as a frantic, incoherent babble. He spoke of a vengeful valley, of cracking ice, of the ground itself opening up to swallow his friends. They called him mad. They said the cold had gotten to his brain. No one believed him. The story of Shadow Creek was dismissed as the lunatic ravings of a man who had lost everything, including his mind. Finn O'Connell never recovered. He spent the rest of his short life working menial jobs, haunted by the nightmares of what he had witnessed. He would often be found staring north towards the mountains, muttering the same words over and over. "The old man warned us. The old man warned us." The Klondike Gold Rush was a singular moment in history, a testament to human endurance and the powerful, often destructive allure of greed. Thousands of lives were changed forever by the promise of the yellow metal. But for every story of a fortune found, there are 100 stories of those who were lost, who vanished into the vast, unforgiving wilderness, their fates unknown. The story of Jack Thornton, Finn, and Marcus O'Connell is not one you will find in the history books. It has become a legend, a cautionary tale whispered around campfires by those who have spent enough time in the North to know that some places are best left undisturbed. No one ever went looking for Shadow Creek again. The land had reclaimed it. Perhaps it's just a story, or perhaps it's a reminder that we are only guests in this ancient world. A reminder that some treasures are not meant to be unearthed, and some warnings are not meant to be ignored. Because sometimes, when you dig on sacred ground, the only thing you'll find is your own grave.